Steadily, the great sphere of the Earth spun upon its axis and moved in its unvarying course around the sun. From far-off Venus, a watcher of the skies, if such a one can be imagined to exist, viewed it as a more brilliant planet than any to be seen by us Earthmen. It gave no sign that storms or men disturbed its tranquil round. Of midnight, or yellow in the dawn, the Earth hung in the sky, unflickering. The same forecast, day after day, week after week. The junior meteorologists wanted to yell blizzards, thunder, lightning, and hurricanes. But as long as that high-pressure area hung off the coast, it would be the same. Fair tonight and tomorrow, no change in temperature. This wasn't weather, it was a bore, and nothing on this morning's weather map could change it. Oh, there were storms, plenty of them, but always somewhere else. Sylvia, an old friend, was now over Boston, dumping a heavy fall of snow before she swept on across the Atlantic. Felicia, poor thing, wasn't doing too well. By all indications, she would die in the fastnesses of the Northwest Territory. But Cornelia, the junior meteorologist, was proud of Cornelia. A big, full-bodied dowager of a storm, 400 miles at sea, southeast of Dutch Harbor. He had known all of them since birth, days ago in the far western reaches of the Pacific. And it was his private pleasure to give them names. His eyes swept across the map down the arc of the Aleutians and the islands of Japan. And then he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A ship halfway between the weather stations of Haridoyashima and Titijima had reported a barometric pressure of 1011. Yet by its position, it should have been 1012. The temperatures of the ship and the weather station showed too wide a divergence. The wind forces in the directions were at variance. Cold air from the tundras of Siberia had met warm air from the coral atolls of the Southern Ocean. So he rerouted a section of the 1012 isobar. A proud city, San Francisco, set upon hills, pearl gray in the winter sun, swept clean of smoke and dust by the steady wind from the sea. A city of towers and banners standing out stiff in the northwest wind. In the streets of the city, women clutched at their skirts and men at their hats in the invigorating sun-filled breeze. And they greeted each other with sparkling smiles.
Great weather we're having. Puts life in a fella.
But out in the country, there was a drought in the vast Central Valley. The grain and the grasses curled by drought ceased growing. And the well-to-do cattlemen ordered cottonseed meal at the Fresno mills. And in Tehama County, a not-so-well-to-do cattleman received a polite but firm letter from his bank. And an hour later, in the barn, they found his body hanging. Maria did bear watching. Half as large as the United States, she rolled across the Pacific at 1,000 miles a day. Yet nowhere did she touch land. So vast and empty is the great ocean between the Aleutians and Midway Island. All over the top of the world rested unbroken darkness like a cap. Through that polar night, the flow of heat into outer space was like the steady drain of blood from an open wound. As the air thus grew colder and colder, it shrank toward the surface of the earth. Upon every square mile of snow-covered land and frozen sea, the air weighed more heavily with the passing of each sunless hour. Arctic islands and the ice floes of the Beaufort Sea, the polar air swept southward across the plains at 50 miles an hour, across Alberta and Saskatchewan. By noon, it engulfed Edmonton. Just before the winter sunset, Saskatoon and Calgary. At midnight, it crossed the border and invaded the United States. By daybreak, it had occupied much of Montana and North Dakota and was advancing on Minnesota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. But in San Francisco, the proud banners on the tall towers still streamed southeast in the winter sun. Continued fair today. No change in temperature. Rain. The load dispatcher of Power and Light was ready for the electric heaters that would be turned on against the chill, and the lights that would burn later in the morning and earlier in the evening. Somewhere in his maze of high and low voltage wires, his powerhouses and his dams, there would be trouble, but he was ready. Rain. The plant superintendent of the telephone company sent some extra men up along US 40 in case things went bad on the pass. Rain. The general manager of the railroad dispatched the assistant divisional engineer and the chief trainmaster to Immigrant Gap and Norton to take charge of track clearance in the pass. For rain on the coast, rain in the valley, rain in the motherlode meant snow on the pass. The pass. The first covered wagons crossed the pass in 1844 from the high plateau of Nevada to the gravid valley of the Sacramento, where yet unsuspected, gold lay in the sands of foothill streams. 500 wagons crossed in 46, crossed safely. All but the last, the Donner Party. The snow caught them, and the horror of their story has imprinted their name upon the pass and broods still over peak and canyon like a legend of Greek tragedy. But today, gleaming streamliners glide between the snowy crags with 20th century ease. The transcontinental telephone carries chit-chat and the closing of deals, the word of birth and death, and the jokes and tunes of radio through the high canyons and over the summits. The great steel towers of the Power and Light High Line cut their wide path through the lodgepole pines and the tamaracks as they march with metal feet across the mountain. And feeling its way more subtly, following the contours of the convoluted land, is U.S. Highway 40, the all-weather road across the Sierras, one of the 5 great mountain gateways to California. Far out at sea, the crippled freighter Byzantium, her rudder jury-rigged, made for Honolulu in repairs under a sunny sky. She had ridden out the storm, but she had lost her first officer overboard. Mariah was indeed a killer, and she announced her coming with a wave of pain. As she moved steadily shoreward, old lumberjack joints grown stiff in the dripping of redwood forests twinged and throbbed. From Cape Disappointment to Point Arguello, overworked mothers winced with headaches. Nerve ends of leg stumps tingled. Old wounds of the Argonne and Guadalcanal ached again. In a moving belt 150 miles before the rain, renewed tortures prevailed in the hurt and maimed limbs of men. First, so fine was east beyond the Sierras and the Rockies, the river of polar air swept on. Behind it, the snow-plastered houses of Cincinnati and Louisville, the quick frozen ponds of the Ozarks. In Abilene and Fort Worth and Dallas, they felt it now. And men battling their way along gale-swept streets reminded themselves. Rain will not harm a high-tension line. Snow will build up on it and then fall away of its own weight and bulk. But ice. At the 3,000-foot level in the Sierra the morning after the storm broke, neither rain nor snow fell from the turgid clouds, but sleet, sheathing the trees in bizarre robes of ice, coating the wires of the power and light's 60-kilovolt line until they were a half-inch thick, an inch, 2 inches, until the weight became more than copper cable could bear. U.S. Highway 40 was still open, but only because the road superintendent and his crew had pushed the flangers and the rotaries around the clock for nearly 72 hours. And now the snow was thicker than ever, and the superintendent standing at the doorway of the maintenance station. She was blocked, all right. At Windy Point, a big truck and trailer was jackknifed across the road, and the drifts were already piling up. To lose the road was to lose his honor. But that night, as Mariah thrashed across the Sierra in her death throes, the superintendent once more held the road. Once more, the storm gave out before his machines did, or his men. Once more. There would come a time and a storm, he reminded himself, when they might not. The junior meteorologist turned back to his map, filling in reports from land stations across half the world and ships spun out upon the great ocean. But soon he let his eyes wander down the Kuril Islands and across the Sea of Japan, where surely a new wave should be forming.
Sound patterns by Ray Kemper and Bill James. Original music for tonight's program was composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith.